One of the videos that we've had a lot of requests for is installing cable into conduit. Conduit systems are on a lot of boats. They offer a bunch of advantages, mostly to the builder, in that they save a lot of space, and they offer some convenience when you're building the boat. You can avoid putting a few parts in, but it's got this run of hard conduit, and you've got a fixed section of that can bend. It can go wherever. It can avoid the nice shower that's in the where the quarter berth would go. So there is a good reason for having a conduit system. They do have a few downsides to them. One is that they're expensive to replace. The conduit itself is a couple of bucks a foot, and it's not a simple thing necessarily to put new cable into new conduit, but it can be done, and it can be done without too much swearing. So hopefully we'll help you get to the other side of success on this one. So as we work down from the pedestal, instead of having a normal idler plate, which would have two shivs underneath it, the bottom of your pedestal is going to have some variation of this plate in a conduit system, and this captures the ends of the conduit with these end fittings, and the cable goes directly down from the pedestal into the conduit here. I'm showing one here, but there will be two. The conduit is a pull-pull system, so you have two cables, and only the pull one is doing work. It's not pushing. The one that's being turned away from is just kind of taking up slack back up into the pedestal. But the first thing that you want to do is to install the end fitting onto the conduit. Then you want to have the end fitting installed into the bracket, and typically you'll want to have the bracket loose when you do this, so you'll reinstall the bracket last. As you could see, if this would be the underside of the cockpit sole right here, not a lot of space to get in there. So by having the bracket down, pulled away, you give yourself more working room to both put the end fitting on and then to stuff the cable into the conduit. So that's how we're going to start. On the other end, same deal. We just have an end fitting, and this is going to go into a special kind of an idler shiv system that has a threaded fitting on the end, and this end fitting threads into that, and you use the nut on the back side. And then these end fittings themselves are both screwed on, so there's threaded inside, and then they also secure with a hose clamp. So when you get the conduit, it'll ship in one length for whatever length you've ordered, and it's up to you to cut it to the right length. You can just use the old lengths of conduit as a length guide, and the cutting is relatively simple. You just use a hacksaw, and it's got this kind of braided steel core in here, and you just want to clean that up with a file so that there are no rough burrs on the end of it. And I'm going to show you putting on this inline grease port, which will also be the same technique that you would use to put on an end fitting. And this inside of this is threaded, so you just line it up and you screw it on. Easy enough. Get it till it bottoms. There it is. And then you just tighten up the hose clamp. Get it nice and secure. So this inline greaser is a real convenience for keeping the system greased and operating smoothly. You want to keep the cable greased inside of the conduit, and you want to do that as a regular maintenance thing every 6 months or so of use. And we recommend that more than about a 10-foot cable run you want to put one of these in just to make sure that you have enough throw in the cable to get it back and forth within there. If you put it in at an end with a longer run, it'll only get so far in past either end before, you know, the middle of the conduit run won't get greased. So with these, you just take off the top, and then you can use your super lube. This is a small tube. Obviously you can use a bigger tube, but you just push grease into it and then turn the wheel, and that will distribute the grease up and down, and you can do that a couple times. Now, an important note on grease: it's really important that you use only a synthetic grease. We use this Teflon-based super lube. The conduit has a plastic lining that separates the steel core of the conduit from the steel cable, and it reduces the friction in the system by a whole lot. The problem with using a natural grease or a petroleum-based grease is that the petroleum-based greases will attack the plastic and wear it away, and eventually you'll have steel-on-steel contact between the core of the conduit and the cable, and that'll introduce a lot of friction, and it will also break down your steering cable. So you want to be sure only to use a Teflon-based lubricant. That's very important. The conduit liner is really the thing that breaks down over time. You have abrasion, even though it's relatively friction-free, you do have abrasion from the cable running through the conduit. And over time, this is the same 10-year recommended lifespan as normal cable. The inside of the conduit, that liner, will get abraded, will potentially have bare spots where there are some of the harder turns in the system. And if you put new cable into old conduit, then those bare spots will just be the new cable running on the bare inside steel of the conduit, and you can chew up a new cable in no time. So we do strongly recommend replacing the whole conduit and cable at the same time. It's a big chunk, but it's only every 10 years that we recommend that you do this. So it's very worth doing all at once. Okay, so as with everything, there are some tips and tricks to this to make it a lot easier and keep your swear jar a lot emptier. A bunch of these come from Ken Martin, who's been doing customer service at Edson for longer than you can imagine and helped a ton of people get through this successfully. So a few of his great ideas are, first, to make sure that the inside of the conduit is nice and clean. Sometimes when you cut it, you can get a little plastic burr in there, so just take really anything, you can do it with a Phillips head, and clean that out. And then before you grease anything, and again this is with our bracket off, you start feeding the wire into the conduit, and just like with other chain and cable steering systems, this is going to terminate on the quadrant with some cable clamps. And what you want to do is mark the length that you'll need to get to the cable clamps, and then with a magic marker make a nice mark on your cable at that point. Pull the cable back out, and then find your mark, pre-feed the cable into that mark, and then start applying the grease from that mark, and apply the grease to the cable. And you want to be liberal with the grease, so a little bit, shove it in, a little more grease, and really coat the cable. kind of a continuous, nice, thick coating. But with Ken's tip, the grease that you put on the cable will be distributed into the conduit. And again, I would have greased that a lot more had this not been just for a video. But this end comes out nice and clean. So now you have a clean shot at doing this with your cable clamps, and you're not getting grease all over your hands. There's not, it's not going to be like trying to wrestle a mud wrestle with a pig. You have a nice clean cable there to get around the thimble, make it fast to the tensioning eye, and then put the cable clamps on. Okay, so obviously this gets a little tougher when you're doing it in an enclosed space inside your boat. Tough to reach things, but what hopefully this video has done is give you a good, clear look at the mechanics of installing the cable into the conduit, attaching the end fittings to the idler bracket, and making the whole thing come together. Just like a regular chain and cable steering system, you want to keep this maintained. You want to grease it every 6 months or twice a year as you're using it. Significantly more in Caribbean, high heat, high salinity environments. You still want to keep your chain greased, and you can do that with Edson Chain Care just like other ones. Very important that you use a synthetic. We use Teflon-based grease so that you don't have petroleum-based grease eating the liner of the conduit. It is a big project to replace it, but it's a lot less of a project when you're doing it in the safety and relative ease of the either on the hard or at your slip versus in the middle of the night in a storm, which is inevitably when all these things go bad. So hopefully these tips give you a big head start on replacing your conduit and putting a new cable in.